All right, good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started, see if we can stay on time today. That's kind of my job. We'll see if we can do a better job about it today. So, first thing we want to go over is just some general housekeeping things. We're going to have 2 sessions in this room before lunch, and then after lunch, we'll have 1 session in this ballroom and 1 session in the ballroom next to us. Make sure you get your business cards to Gladys. She's going to be doing more raffles today. And also, around noon, we'll get the results from the golf tournament. So I know we're all pretty excited about that. I think I missed the longest drive by about 10 yards, but that is what it is. So I just want to thank our sponsors for today's session. That's Swanson Rink, Burns McDonnell, and Rosenbauer. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Hope you all had a restful night of sleep, because if you know me at these conferences, I never, ever, ever go to sleep after 9 p.m., ever. Plus, I'm in a strict workout regimen just for Gladys, so upper body, got to get it going. So we got a great session lined up for you this morning, get you energized for the day, managing projects and choosing the best delivery method for your airport and project. We're going to be talking about different delivery methods for consideration for your airport construction projects. Construction projects require a significant investment of time, energy, resources, and dollars, and it's important that we become a little more educated via our esteemed panel of speakers here, and we'll be discussing multiple viewpoints and perspectives with this panel here. Recognizing the importance of this topic and the fact that some airport sponsors may not be quite as exposed as others in terms of these different project delivery methods. We'll leave quite a bit of time at the end for question and answer. So please hold your questions until the end. We'll save about 20 or 25 minutes for Q&A at the end. I do want to introduce our speakers here today. First, we have Renju Abraham, engineer and project manager with Burns and McDonnell. He'll be giving an overview of current trends associated with the different project delivery methods. Next, we have Mike Smejkal, Vice President of Planning and Engineering at Tucson Airport Authority, discussing the owner's perspective. Sandy Kukla in the red, consultant architect and executive vice president of DWL Architects and Planners, will be providing the consultant's perspective with project delivery. After that, we have Mike Hill from Sundt Construction, Senior Project Manager. We'll discuss the perspective from the contractor. And we'll finish with Tim Morrison, the Phoenix FAA-ADO, providing some insight and guidance from the FAA with respect to these project delivery methods. So with that, we'll turn it over to Renju.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Ryan. So like Ryan said, I'm going to give you an overview on the various delivery methods and just chat a little bit about the details of some of those. I have 10 minutes left, 10 or 12 minutes, and I'll try to cover as much as possible. So 2017 ASE Infrastructure Evaluation Report stated that at least in the next 7 or 8 years, United States need to fund a $1.5 trillion gap for the infrastructure projects. Our airports are ready to do the work, our designers are ready to start the design, and contractors are ready to build, but there is one pressing problem, which is funding. And many airports are used to the conventional or traditional design bid build method, but where's the problem, or what are the issues? So various delivery methods have been reviewed, design build, progressive design build, CM at risk, P3, job order contracting, CMH, and how or what is the best construction method, or what is the ideal choice? The answer is it depends on who you ask, or what are the different criteria. So I just want to give you a background on something called the McLeamy curve, which was just developed by somebody called Patrick McLeamy in 2004. Many of you architects and designers are probably extremely familiar with that. The red line on the screen shows actually the cost of change associated with any project. During the initial schematic design phase, the cost is very minimal if you want to make any change. But as the design progresses, as soon as it crosses a certain time period, that changes a lot. And the black curve on the left side, starting at the high point, is actually the flexibility curve. You know, in the initial stages of design, you have a lot of room to make adjustments or changes. And you can see a graph in the middle which shows actually the effort associated with the design. So during the construction, up until the construction phase, the effort is tremendously high. So in association with the various design delivery methods or project construction delivery methods, the conclusion is that if you can change the effort in the initial phase, or it is called the front-end loading, then there could be a much more effective design delivery method. So we are going to look at the traditional design bid build method. You know, most people are extremely familiar with this. Very conventional, especially those who are working on FAA funded programs. The owner chooses the designer based on qualifications, and soon after that, a competitive bids will be received, and the owner will play as the point of contact between the designer and the builder. And in the bar chart that you see there, the system is very organized and systematic. It's one step at a time. You know, the owner chooses the designer, then the designer goes through the various design milestones, 30%, 60%, 90%, and finally a bid set documents are issued. And then it goes to the public bidding and value engineering, and then the construction starts. But unfortunately, there are multiple points of contact, and this is not the most preferred method among various stakeholders, because many times there will be, you know, during the construction process, all the problems start to come out, and people are like starting the blame game or finger pointing. The contractor says the designer was it wrong, and the designer says, well, the survey was incorrect. And there will be an argument, there will be, at the end of the project, there's a very good potential that there could be a lawsuit. So what is the solution for this? That stirred up the need for other methodology. So design build is actually one of the solutions. I don't know whether everyone would agree that it's a perfect solution, but design build is definitely a solution. So I was talking to the president of DBIA, and he said that it is not really a new methodology. It has been very old. Like, you know, Egyptians used to do this in 2000 BC. And I was pretty surprised to hear that. And he said that that's the reason why DBIA has a pyramid in their logo. It's not by accident that they picked a unique logo for that. So there was a study released by an agency called FMI, and they state that by 2021, 45% of construction projects, not specifically on aviation side, will be design build. And the design bid build traditional delivery method will be limited to less than 19%. So clearly the industry is heading towards this methodology. What's the difference? What is the advantage? So there'll be one point of contact between the owner. Instead of choosing a designer first and then a contractor based on the bids, there's going to be one point of contact, and they'll be called the design builder. And the design builder will have an architect or engineer, depending on the terminal project or an airside project, they will have an architect and engineer. And the benefit being, if you look at the bar chart, there's only one red segment in the beginning where that's the only time period during which there will be selection process going on. And then the design starts, and you can clearly see that the construction overlaps with the design time frame. Recently, I was working on a design build program at San Diego International Airport, an FIS project, which was budgeted at $250 million. And it was done in a record time of 2 years. The design build methodology was used for that project. One of the huge benefits was that if it was not for design build, there was no way that project would have completed in that 2-year time frame. When all the disciplines, you know, primarily the civil and architects, everyone was submitting the 30% design plans, the structural team, because of the permit package and the long lead items associated with the structural construction, they submitted a 95% design package. So, and the contractor was able to order steel so that the schedule won't slip. So that was a key factor. And another benefit being, you know, passenger boarding bridges, which typically requires a long lead, at least 18 months of lead time, could be ordered early. You know, you don't have to wait for the design to be completed. So into the design build mix, add some of the different elements like finance and finance operation. So you get all these different project delivery methods, DBFOM, DBOO, leaseback. We don't have the time to go into the details of that. But here is a graph comparing those two, the design bid build. So the design bid build methodology schedule in our world, definitely schedule means money. And these are some of the benefits. You know, clearly, single point of accountability, single point of responsibility. and the design build delivery method is considered faster and cheaper. And here's a slide that was released from the FMI, which says that the schedule growth historically, based on 200 plus projects that FMI studied in 2018, clearly it is a faster delivery method. Moving on to the next delivery method, which is a CM at risk. So in the CM at risk method, it's a little bit similar to the design bid build, but also a combination of these two. Designer is selected early in the process, not at the conclusion of the design. And a contractor is brought on board probably during the design phase, typically at a 30% design level. Some of the benefits being the CM performs the work and the guarantees the price, schedule, and quality. And the selection is usually made on a qualitative basis also. I worked on a CM at risk on an airside project 10, 12 years ago. That was probably one of the earliest FAA-funded CM at risk project. It was at the Flagstaff Airport. At the end of the project, we were ahead of schedule. We were able to save a lot of money. And I still remember clearly that during the final construction, or prior to the final construction release of the documents, we were working closely with the contractor on value engineering, how we can save money. You know, do we have to go for asphalt shoulders for the runway, or can we go for other options? Different value engineering methods. So that's one definite benefit of a CM at risk. However, there are some states, some legislations that really do not permit CM at risk in every case. I live in California, Southern California. We don't have much of a problem implementing CM at risk, but there are definitely other states where CM at risk is not really well received. Another delivery method is the public-private partnership. Technically, P3, in my opinion, or based on some of the material that I read, it's really an alternative project funding mechanism associated with the design build. And this methodology is very prevalent in UK, Canada, and Australia. They are much more familiar with this process. The reason for P3 being such an attractive methodology is the philosophy is, you know, you buy now, pay later. It's kind of a credit card situation. I have 2 more minutes. I'm going to skip job order contracting. I'm sorry, I'll talk a little bit about job order contracting. So this is a project delivery method which is widely used in the military field. It's widely known as the IDIQ, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. Very similar to the on-call, but the difference being you will have a contractor associated with that. And sometimes you'll have lots of work. Sometimes you may not get any projects out of it, but it's very similar to the on-call, but the difference being just not only for designing, but for contractor also will be on the selection list. So I'm going to skip this one. So this is my last slide. So at the end of the day, how do you select a method, or what is the criteria for this, or how do you make that determination? The answer is, it all depends on what is your ultimate objective, or is it a simple, straightforward, well-defined project? Do you want a single contractual responsibility, or do you have an expedited schedule? Are you looking for the owner to control the design? These are all the questions that you probably need to ask. Definitely, and depending on what you want to accomplish, you probably need to evaluate different options, and it will be a case-by-case scenario. And always, I have to acknowledge our FAA representative here. If you're definitely using FAA funding, you always need to get their approval and, so that your funding won't be at risk. And always when you choose a delivery method, make sure that the last bullet point, remember that. Make sure that somebody who is leading the project from your side, from the owner side, has some exposure and familiarity, and past success at the airport should be considered for choosing the factor, which delivery method that you should be choosing. So with that, Mike.
All right, thanks, Ren. Appreciate that overview. I could have used that last night. My wife and I were talking, and for those of you who don't know her, she's a speech and language pathologist, and we typically try not to talk shop at home. And anyway, she asked me last night, well, what are you talking about tomorrow? She knew I was doing this. I go, alternative delivery method. And she goes, are there midwives and gynecologists in the room? And I'm like, well, no. Apparently I needed a little more background that Ren just gave. So this is, I'm giving the owner's perspective, and I'll caveat it. This is one owner's perspective. As we were even talking earlier, there's like reading AIP handbook and ACs, there's depending on your attorney and your procurement professionals, there's certainly some areas of interpretation, certainly across state statutes and state lines, but so I would say these are guidelines. These are by no means hard and fast rules about how you should go about deciding what you want to do. So just kind of hitting the highlights real quick on design, bid, build. Like Ren talked about, I think this is what we're most familiar with. Just as an easy example from our perspective, these are the ones that, your very clearly defined scope, simple phasing projects that can be put on plans very easily, essentially. And, just as an example here is economy lot mill and overlay. It's a classic simple one that is a good way to do design, bid, build. You can very clearly put all the information or almost all the information on the plan so that the contractors can go out and bid it. And from the contractor's perspective, it's a relatively low risk as far as knowing what they're getting themselves into. So they should be able to give you a good price for it. Talking about CMAR a little bit, we've used CMAR quite extensively at Tucson, both on AIP funded project, PFC funded project, and locally funded projects. So I'll talk about a couple of them. First off, our apron reconstruction project. This is our terminal apron. This is kind of shows you, some background of it. And we went to the FAA. This was probably 2010 or 11, to try to justify using CMAR on this project. And really there was a couple good reasons we went to the FAA why we wanted to use it. First off, we knew it was going to be a multiple year funded project. We knew we weren't going to be able to get AIP funding in a single year. It was somewhere in the $40 million time from a cost perspective and just from a phasing perspective, working around airline gates. At one point we were thinking maybe it was a 5 or 6 year project. Due to the downturn in the recession, we had a couple of gates freed up, and we were actually able to take more down at a time than we initially thought. But it still ended up being about a 2-year construction project. But also not knowing how much money we were going to get each year from the FAA's perspective in a GMP. A CMAR has, the advantage of having that contractor there during, providing pre-construction services, allows them to interact and understand the constraints within airlines and all the users, but also allows us to get much better pricing and running, a lot of scenarios. When you do design, bid, build work and you put 15 alternates to it, I don't think the contractors like it very much. But when you're working with the CMAR, they're working side by side and they're being able to develop. So we were able to do a base bid, but at the end, at working to the FAA up until the last minute, knowing that, okay, we may have this much more money coming at the end of the year. So we were able to work through and develop this program with them. And again, it allowed us to actually end up being 3 GMPs when it was all said and done. The other key point to this, and I think what we helped the FAA buy into this project was we have an underground fueling system, fuel piping system, and we have a 400 hertz system. And we did not want to have to do hard bid on that and have 3, 4, 5 different contractors working on it and then trying to do warranty service on those various, very critical elements to the airlines, and not wanting to have to, try to clearly define a cut-off point from one contractor to the other. So I think those are the 2 main reasons we worked on it. So I did put some graphics in here. So it essentially just shows you how we built it. We actually, again, we thought it was going to be a 5-year project, ended up being about a 2-year project because we had that CMAR on board and obviously being able to get funding much quicker. We also did our terminal optimization program. Actually, some of the folks on the panel here helped us out with this project. Another good CMAR project, we had the contractor come on board, work hand in hand with the architect and engineering team. And again, it's a very complicated. We're trying to keep the terminal open, but we're trying to renovate, gut it essentially all at the same time. And we have for our airport, it's from Mike, 12:30 in the morning till about 4 o'clock in the morning is about the only time we can really turn the power off. So we when you have very complicated, phasing, very complicated cutover programs, this included a lot of backbone infrastructure work. We replaced both east and west electrical rooms, reconstructed our MDF room. So having the contractor there and his team there working with the architect and really fine-tuning those details of how these things are going to work during the design side of things really pays off. And that's another time I think CMAR is a very good tool to use. So design build we have used as well, both actually I think one of the few AIP funded projects, and we've used it on some locally funded projects. So from my perspective on design build, there's not too many instances where I think the AIP is probably the best method, like Ren talked about. You need to talk to your local ADO staff if you want to use this. I think our unique perspective on this one is we got a solar project that was constructed with AIP funds. I'm going around. So the unique aspect and why it worked from a design build perspective, as Ren talked about, you basically have some minimum requirements you can lay out, but you really want that design build team, the architect and the contractor or the engineer, to work together to develop it. So we were able to give them, hey, this is how many megawatts of power we have, this is where you're going to build it, and then you go and you figure it out. It worked for AIP because AIP does not have any sort of standards or specifications when it comes to solar. So we were able to utilize AIP funds because there just wasn't, we still had to work with the FAA, they still had to approve all the plans and approve the process. But since they didn't have a standard to work, to check against, it allowed our team to kind of create a solution. If you go to a traditional airfield pavement project, the FAA specifications and design standards are so prescriptive. I don't know that you're going to get the benefit in design build for an engineering team and a contracting team work together. So this is one instance where I do think AIP works. But I would, there are certainly other non-AIP projects. A lot of building projects, especially green build, where you want to build very quickly, like Ren mentioned, where you need to get that steel ordered early on, is where you can say, X 1,000 square foot building, I want this finish, this minimum space requirements, a design build may be the right choice for you. The other place we use design build quite a bit is on technology projects. Our IT folks really like it because we can score both on qualifications, and that's what this, I know you can't really read it, but this kind of spreadsheet talks about is how we score on both qualifications and on price. You have to put that in the RFQ when you put it out there that, it's, you can split it up however you want. We usually do about 60% qualifications, 40% price, and the price doesn't even have to be, can be both initial price, but it can also be O&M long-term price, so you can factor that in. And again, we really like it for the technology projects because our IT guys can pick the software or the hardware packages as well as the integration team, and that seems to work. And we know what the cost is kind of going into it as selection time. So they really appreciate that perspective because you don't want to hard bid, your access control system or your CCTV system because no matter how well you think you can write those specifications, somebody's going to tell you that their product meets those, and they usually don't. So just some kind of wrap up. Again, every project's different. You got to look at it. One thing I do want to point out from owner's perspective, and we have to talk to this with our staff, is like Ren mentioned, the relationships in each one of these methods is different, and you need to know that going in. Your staff needs to understand that. Ex-contractor on a CMAR project, when they can negotiate general conditions and overhead, I mean that, when you're doing the actual costing of the project, the materials and the labor is more or less the same. It's the but on a CMAR contract, you have the ability to negotiate an appropriate general conditions, which is that oversight, the project management team, all of those things. So if it works correctly, your CMAR contract, project or your design build, if you negotiate general conditions, allows you to have appropriate project management team. Where on design build, that's probably the thing that gets cut when they're trying to make the project, win the hard bids. You may only have one engineer or one project management professional. So, your staff needs to understand if you have the same contractor, one doing a CMAR project, one doing a design build bid build project, you're going to have a slightly different relationship. They all want to do a good job for you, but they also need to make a profit. So you need to understand that it's going to be a different relationship. And we have some contractors that won't even do design bid build work because they don't want to ruin that CMAR kind of relationship that they've established. So, Ren talked about the other points there. Obviously, I think you need to very clearly talk to FAA when you're going to start using any sort of funding, PFC or AIP type of work, just to make sure that they're on board with that process before you get too far along. So with that, I will turn it over to Sandy.
Okay, thank you, Mike. All right, so consultant's perspective, my perspective. So I'm going to talk about three different projects as examples. So design build was Phoenix Sky Harbor Terminal 3. It's actually ongoing. And then a combination of CMAR design bid build and JOC was used for the West Terminal expansion at Phoenix Mesa Gateway Airport. And then, of course, the Tucson the terminal optimization program at Tucson. I'm going to start off with design build since Mike ended with it. And just an overview of the project, it's a sizable project, 3 major components, all phased, 25 gates, $590 million for the project, total of 1.9 million square feet, and it's designed for about 11 million annual passengers. What was great with design build on this project was it's quite complex. The main structure of the main terminal processor and the north concourse were completely reused. The structure was reused. So it's a modernization. The demolition contractor came in and really helped us understand how we could remove major sections of the main terminal floor. The big double T is really heavy, and we wanted to connect the building vertically. So they came in and really assisted with that, and very successful. So a couple of the characteristics of the design build for Terminal 3. Again, large-scale project, a very active campus. This construction is ongoing with a 24-hour operational airport. So that was pretty tough on the contractor, as well as for the design team trying to create various phasing packages for the contractors and the subcontractors to bid off of. The toughest part came first, actually. Maybe it would have been better to do the easiest thing first, but no, we went with the toughest part first, the main terminal. Trying to discover a lot of the structure and how the original building was put together was a bit of an unknown, and there was a lot of questions during construction on the structure. We talked about phasing. It was phased in the funding and the construction. And then, of course, most airports have multiple stakeholders, but in our case, on top of the TSA and all the airport departments, we had 10 airlines on this project. So talk about cats and dogs, trying to herd those. So that was tricky. And then the design is quite unique. It was a inward-facing building. If anybody can just, in your mind's eye, remember what Terminal 3 used to be, very dark and inward-facing. So we wanted to make it very light and outward-facing. You can see the views. Some things that we learned from Terminal 4, people got confused where they were in Terminal 3 and Terminal 4 in terms of north, south, east, west. So we wanted to fix that. And the airport and the city really wanted this to be a point of pride. So, quality and unique design were very important. Okay. So, in order to think about design build, what I wanted to just do is pose some questions for everybody to think about. Is a project definition manual required? Absolutely. In design build, you have to define your quality of your project and what you want. And for really large projects, sometimes when you do that prior to selecting your design build, you don't have all of the answers at that time. So that can be get a little bit tricky. And so how does communication occur with the designer? Well, it occurs through the contractor. The owner and the designer have to communicate through the contractor. So you have to understand that. And so who is the client? Well, it depends on who you ask on that. If you ask the airport who the client is, they're going to say, well, we're the client. If you ask the design team who the client is, it's the contractor. It's as simple as that. Our contract is with the contractor. Our best intentions is always what's best for the community, what's best for the airport, as designers are. We always want to do the best thing. But honestly, our contract's with the contractor. The next portion, the CMAR, design, bid, build, and the JOC, and Mike had spoke about the terminal optimization project at Tucson. It was actually a combination of multiple methods for this, really large program, and we did that, or they did that, as a good decision of try to, doing the best for each project as we separated it out. So as he talked about, the large infrastructure and the checkpoint project was a CMAR. But prior to that, they were sort of enabling projects were done with the JOC and a design bid build. And that was the relocation of their administrative offices. And I thought the JOC worked really well in that aspect. But I'm going to get into that a little bit. So also another large program at Phoenix Mesa Gateway Airport, sort of the same thing. We used all these different methods as it fit into each component of the project over about a 5-7 year period. The place went from 0 scheduled service to over 1 million, and so the growth was doubling upon doubling very, very quickly. So that was a bit tricky to manage. Okay, so design, bid, build. I'm going to just hit on just a couple of things from our perspective. The design, bid, build we did at Phoenix Mesa Gateway was phase 3. It was, the third phase of the project, and the design was set. There was really no more trying to figure things out. Things were pretty settled, so it's a pretty good method for them. So let's see. We did detailed documents. The phasing was done by the designer. And then also the scope was very well defined. This graph kind of shows a lot of some of the characteristics and a comparison of CMAR to design, bid, build and CMAR to JOC. And you can see that they're pretty close. CMAR is a lot better than design, bid, build and a little better than JOC. But what this shows, though, is that some of the characteristics that are important to the consultant team. So it's quality, it's the value added, it's your relationships with your contractor, and the overall saneness, I would say, of working as a group, as a team. So I think that if you think back on what was spoken about before with Renju and Mike, it was very much schedule and budget driven. But I think from the consultant's perspective, we're a lot more driven from goals and vision and quality and making sure that the project meets the community's needs. So the very quickly on the JOC, small scale project, the lower left-hand corner there, this is at Tucson. To mitigate risk, we went ahead and did the demolition with the JOC. So the this restaurant was up there, had been up there for, years and years and years, and the tenant's been there, so we didn't know really what was there. But so that was a really good idea to do the JOC. You might get contractors that are a bit smaller and less sophisticated and may not understand all the processes. So we'll have to, be ready for that. And then finally, the CMAR, just a couple of highlights I wanted to pick out here with the time during design process might be longer. The contractor needs the time between schematic design, design development, and CDs to do the constructability, to get the input from the subs. That takes time. It can't happen in 2 weeks, so 5, 6, 7 weeks. And sometimes if there's VE and scope reduction, be prepared for that. And let's not bury our head in the sand that it's not going to come in high. It is going to come in, a bit higher, and we got to work through that. So I think just preparing the team that's going to happen is wise. And then, again, to wrap up on CMAR, I think the reason the design team likes the CMAR is that the contractor comes on board and everybody's on board with the project goals, and everybody's working as a team. So I think that really helps. And by far, I think the CMAR, well, I'm not going to say by far, but the quality of the project, both implementing of the design and purely the quality of construction, is probably best with CMAR from my perspective. So I just want to end with a couple of lessons learned here. Definitely do an analysis. Establish your project criteria, vision, and goals. I think Mike, said these same things. But really understand your organization's characteristics and be honest about it. Who you are as an airport, as an organization, who your staff is. If you've been doing CMARs for the last 15 years and somebody comes along and says, oh, let's do design build, well, there's a change for your staff to understand. And not one size fits all. Just because the latest thing is the latest thing with the trend of one particular method, that may not be the right choice. And then finally, set your project up for success. I think it starts with the airports. Thank you.
So I'm Mike Hill with Sundt, project manager. I've done both design bid build, I've done design build and CMAR. And I'm just like all these guys have said, this is one contractor's opinion, and need to qualify that I'm vertical. I build buildings. I do have Jeff Hamilton in the room to keep me straight if I go into the horizontal work. But from a contractor's perspective, and I've got this up there, I can't read it, it says, why would you bid a project? And a lot of the things that everybody said up here are very good, but from a contractor's perspective, look at the market, because we're bidding labor, where in CMAR you're doing it on time and material, but we're bidding labor, and if the labor market is going crazy, we know it typically takes 4 hours to hang a door frame from a carpenter. We might bid it at 5, just because we want to protect our risk. And if we get the job, now we got to figure out the other job that we just bid at the same time. If we get that one, how are we going to do it? So the labor market and the material market, if they are hot, I would be careful bidding a job, because you're going to get the higher numbers. CMAR and design build, from my perspective, is the same. I approach both with the same enthusiasm, if you want to put it that way, or the same. My job scope is the same. The only difference for me is the way it's contracted. Like Sandy said, the designer would work for the contractor, where the owner would have one spot of communication. So I don't know if we can read, I can get those a little bit better, but like they've said, the project criteria, very clear. You have project, the outline of the project is clear, the specs are clear, and everybody knows what you're doing. If you have underground, that's where it gets a little bit risky. And there I talk about the unemployment, and if you have ample contingency in the market, the response, the subcontractors aren't very busy also. Why to use the alternative delivery, and that's the certainty of the outcome is paramount. So schedule, the dollars, everything else, and the date, cost, quality is critical. The need is dynamic and morphing over time. So you're not really sure the end piece of the design, and I'll talk about that here next, but cost escalating marketplace. That's kind of the opposite of if it's escalating, you can cover that in a design bid or design build or the CMAR. Then the long-lasting facility, the cost of construction is approximately 20% of overall cost of the building. So in my opinion, you can get a cheaper price at the end of the day doing CMAR than you can with design bid build. So all of that said, I am leaning towards the design build or the CMAR. And I don't want to offend anybody with this next slide, but contractors are very good at hard bid. They can look at a detail and tell you whether it's not going to work, or they know whether it's not going to work. They have two objectives in design bid build: get the job and make money doing it. So contractors look through a set. I'm giving the secret handshake away here. So they look through the details, they understand what's not going to work, and they will figure out how much can I get on a change order, and they will bring their dollar a bit down just so they can get the job, and then they change order back in and everybody's happy, supposedly. So my opinion is, I don't know if you can see this, but the little dinghy there is named the original contract. The big ship is named the change orders. And again, I don't want to offend anybody, but that is my opinion as a vertical build contractor. So where I like to go is, first off, Sandy mentioned it, it's all, and this is very cliche, so I don't want to lose you, I'll explain, but it is all about the communication in my mind. Everybody has to be talking the same language, have the same goals, and you can't hide anything to your chest. Select an architect, select a contractor that you trust and that you can work with. And most of the contractors out there can build it, but at the end of the day, it's about the chemistry test. And within minutes, you'll understand, or you'll get whether this is the team you can work for. So the owners, you have this idea above your head of what you want to build. You know your work. You're the owner. You know your business. You know your finance, how to get finances. You know how to run the airport. You know your customers. Maybe it's the FPO, the city council, the authority. It could be the airlines. It could be your customers. At some point, they're going to be asking you for something that leads you to a construction project. And that's when you get this idea above your head that says, I believe we can do this and it will help our customers. So that's kind of the start of the idea. Then you add the architect. And that's important to add an architect or designer. They can take your idea, your little idea above your head, and they can add the efficiencies and the design and the aesthetics. How wide do the corridors need to be to get so many people in and out? What about the fire exiting? They can put all of that piece into your idea. And then you get the contractor. And I love this picture. This is selecting the right contractor makes all the difference. So we can come in, and now you've got a 2/3 complete idea, and the contractors can add the constructability, just like everybody up here has talked about. We can look at schedule. We can look at the cost, making sure that we help manage your budget, and the long lead items. And some of the other things are we can design in safety requirements. We can have designed in the ability to make the construction aggravation as little as possible. I was telling somebody at lunch yesterday that I did work in my own house, and I was aggravated. I was like, golly, that damn contractor. And I was the guy. So we know that when we come into your house, we have to act like we're guests. And so we can help design some of that piece into that design to make it easier. So at the end of the day, you put this whole team together, and it is about the communication. You're all communicating. I've got to read over here again. So you can meet the overall expectations. And I like this saying that when you get the right team, you know you're going to have a good shift. So you have a higher quality. You have a faster overall schedule, lowest cost and we won't read all of those. Limits the design changes, limits the impact to the current operations, is what I was just talking about. It's least amount of confrontation. Good results for your customers and us. Limits the contractor aggravation and liabilities. And you become trusted advisors. And that's what Sundt works for, and a lot of contractors work for, to be your trusted advisor. The one thing that you're doing when you hire a contractor, that's the biggest risk you've got when you hire any of the team to build your project, because it's the most dollar amount contract. So, and at the end of the day, I will tell you, I have had a lot of fun doing CMR projects. And so the opposite of that is when there is not good communication. Or I'll back up. This is, you got your whole idea put together, and now it's on paper. You've had a contractor review it. You've had subcontractors review it. And now you're putting it out. 85% of that project is hard bid. And you can select the subcontractors that you want to go to. You're not putting it out for the world. You know that everybody who's going to bid can do the job, that they're financially stable to do the job. You can arrange the packages to go after minority and disadvantaged businesses, which is a huge deal. We also get what we call pre-qualified bidders. And you're getting the market price. So, they talk about the hard bid versus the CMAR. Keep in mind, 85% of your cost typically are hard bid, because you're going out to most of the trades. So that being said, I do lean, if it was my money sitting here today on this stage, and I will tell you, if I was building a building with my money, I would do it design build or CMAR with a contractor and a designer that I trust. I mean, I don't know. I am a contractor, so this is kind of the project that I had in the past that was CMAR, and I don't know, you can't read all of that, but each one of those little swings is the different perspective that the team had, because there was no communication. You have the way the owner explained it, the way the designer drew it, the way the project manager expected it, the way they paid for it, and what they really wanted was the bottom right. And so that project right now is going on, and I've been struggling through it. It is a CMAR. And at the start of this, I said, the communication is critical, and it is a cliche, but it is part of it, and this is why. So it's not a good sign when you have an owner that won't tell you and communicate the budget. They have a hard time communicating the schedule. They felt like it was their responsibility to hold the budget to themselves, and us and the designers work, and they tell us where we're at the end of the day. Just like Sandy said, it takes 4 to 6 weeks to price out each step of the design. And when you go through that and they come back and say, oh no, you're $4 or $5 million over budget, now we all have to step back and start again. Well, this job, it went through, they had local requirements and they had corporate requirements. Those two, the owner didn't even talk between their requirements. Each were putting money in. Some of them wanted conference area, the other wanted just a cafeteria. And they said, well, we don't have the money to build the cafeteria, but let's take your local money and build the rest of it. And they said, no. So that's been part of the fight, because nobody knew the budget. The owner has gone through 3 sets of project management team, 2 of their own and 1 they hired. Over 10 people. That's 10 people of institutional knowledge that we've lost on that project. The designer was hired, and he was a residential designer, had never done a commercial building. Big mistake. Make sure they're qualified. They ended up firing him, paid him his full amount, fired him because the design, we kept telling them the design's not going to work. The details don't work. I've got mobilizations 3 times for my mason and 3 times for the structural steel. Let's change these. Nope, we're not going to do that. So the communication just broke down, and that job was supposed to have already been finished. We haven't even broke ground yet. So, and one of the comments that was said was the project was a $16 million construction budget, and I don't even know what that includes, whether it's GCs, all that stuff, but the whole budget that we found out from the owner was $40 million. The total all-in budget of cost that everybody estimated was $56. We told them, if we don't build the building, we're within budget. So it's very important. Just make sure you're communicating. So I know we'll take questions in a little bit, but that is a contractor's perspective. So.
I'm Tim Morrison. I'm with the Phoenix ADO. I'm a program manager there. This is my first time sitting in a comfy chair doing a presentation, so I'm real happy I made sure my socks matched this morning. I don't look so good these days. I mean, I can't see real well, so I'm going to have to do the same thing here. You know, the first slide just is, and what I did is I pulled some text out of our various ACs and the AIP handbook, because when the FAA perspective, it's, you know, those are the documents we go to, and then we read them to you. So we don't have a lot of leeway when we come to these reviews. What's important here is that there's a discussion about when you get into it, what is more beneficial than the traditional design bid build. That statement there, you would think, when I get a document in and the sponsor says, well, we're going to save money and we're going to do this and we're going to do that with this design build or CMAR, and CMAR is typically what I see. What you need to do is put in what's the benefit to the federal government of what you're doing. If you're asking for federal dollars, you throw that in there. And there's some components on that, and I'll get into it on the next slides. But when you take a look at closing a runway for a shorter period of time, then there's less of an impact to the national airspace system. So there's a benefit to the NAS by you going to CMAR. Put that kind of thing into your request to us when you start looking at your projects. The second component on that slide is just that reference to 2 CFR 200. That came in about 3-4 years ago and changed the way we looked at a few things, and most of that's been captured in the revision of the AIP handbook. So when someone comes in and presents a project and says, well, we're looking at federal money, potential for federal money, and we want you to approve a CMAR. And the first thing I look at is scale. Right now we have several projects that I husband within the system that like T4 North at Sky Harbor. It's about a $60 million project. Deer Valley Taxiway Delta, it's a $15 million project. So when we start looking at scale, you need about $10 million before you start down this road, from what we've seen. We have several CMARs that we've approved, but that doesn't mean you're going to get federal funding for it. But if you were to get a grant, you could use the CMAR, and we have a terminal and a tower that we've approved CMAR on, but we don't have a construction grant or construction project yet. And the other is complexity. When you're going to shut down a runway, shut down a taxiway, when you start dealing with, and we're a risk-averse organization, so when you start talking about impacts to safety, if the designer and the contractor are talking to one another rather than pointing the finger at one another, then we've improved the safety of that operation, the safety of that construction project. And when you start introducing those sorts of complexities, there's another good reason for going down this road. I might note that my experiences with CMAR, because that's typically what comes to us. Some of the discussions on the JOC and some of the others, there's issues with the competitive nature of those, and I don't believe we would approve those through AIP. And then there's two areas where we have some discussions in our guidance documents. One was the AIP handbook, and the other is the consultant selection. And you'll need to follow that that procedure as far as the consultant selection, and there's just a short write-up in the AIP handbook. So for you to get a FAA grant to construct a project and use an alternative delivery method, you have to get pre-approval. So you'd come to the ADO. It'd be a good idea to come down and sit down with us. We'll review what you submit. Ultimately, the ADO manager would sign off on that, and I would encourage you to reach out to the ADO manager if you have any questions as well, because they're the ultimate decision maker in this process, and they also make sure that we're consistent from ADO to ADO. I can give you my advice, but a lot of times I need to bring my boss in, Mike Williams, to make sure I'm consistent throughout the region and nationally. There's some things I absolutely need, and then I'm going to talk about a couple things that need to be excluded. But this is in the AIP handbook, and that's what has to be in the request that comes to us. Obviously, the engineer's estimate. We need you, the sponsor, to sign off on that and say that you've done a cost analysis. And then it lists a bid tabulation and a copy of the contract ultimately. That'd be a condition of the approval, that once you do have a contract, you provide it to us. What would be excluded is sometimes there's a lot of contingencies that are dropped in there. So when we issue a grant, we don't issue a grant on contingencies. That's not allowed under the AIP. We have workarounds on that. On a design bid build project, I've allowed like utility contingencies, but I exclude them from the grant, and then later on, when you need to use it, we change order those back in. That way the local sponsor has a mechanism to pay for that item without having to go back to their board and change the contract, and then I have a mechanism through the change order to make sure the costs are fair and equitable. And this is a picture of some good-looking people. Ryan pulled an old picture of me from about 15 years ago. Unfortunately, my facial hair has turned gray, and I started looking like Colonel Sanders, so that had to go.
Okay, so as you guys can see here, we've got a very energetic, enthusiastic, and knowledgeable group of professionals that are ready to take your questions. So I'll open it up, and I'll run around with the mic.
Not me. Not me or him. No. Okay.
Mr. Joe Husband.
Thank you very much. Two things. Mike, caught you. The Nightmare Project, I'm sorry.
Oh, me.
Yeah. The Nightmare Project you were speaking at the end of your piece, that was a design bid build.
No, that was CMAR.
That was
It
amazing
was just,
that
it
it
was
could
just
go.
about the communication.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have. No, it was not an airport project.
I thought that. Anyway, following up on that with regard to design bid build, and the biggest, I don't know, challenge is the right word, but the difference is the fact that the designer works for the contractor. So has anybody experimented, number one, has anybody experimented with any language, contractual language within a design build project that actually, I don't want to say mitigates that, but realigns that relationship a little bit so it's more, I hate to say more in favor of the building client. That's first part of the question. Second part of the question, would that even be allowable under the current state law because of the way that that's written?
Are you talking about design build or design bid build?
Design build.
Okay.
Design build where you have the designer that's actually working for the contractor as opposed to working for the building client.
I'm not sure, Sandy, you might be able to answer some of that too, but I'm not sure that, to me, that would be CMAR. Because that's what I'm saying, what I do in a CMAR contract is not much different than I would do in a design build. To me, it's just the contract relationship. But Sandy was saying her customer would be me, but keep in mind, my customer would be you. So we are, as a team, trying to make sure that your goals and objectives are met and your expectations are exceeded and you're happy.
Joe, I think that I've actually often thought about that, is that if there was some language in the contract that talks about what kind of communication the designers can do with the airport, such as we present all options, and sometimes we can't. Sometimes you can't present that option because we can't afford that option, so we can't actually show it. So, maybe there is some language in there. I'm not sure legally what, anything can be written into a contract.
So, Joe, trying to answer your question, are you trying to see whether the designer can satisfy owner's requests bypassing contractors' direction, or what exactly are we trying to?
Yeah, no, and I agree with what Mike has said, that you're right, that is much more aligned to the construction manager at risk thing. But I think there are probably projects, and not at the little meager airport that I currently work at, although it's my favorite in the state right now. But there are projects that probably are more appropriate, valid, and there are advantages to doing a design build versus CMAR. But like I said, one of the things that as the ultimate customer we're challenged with is Mike and Sundt are a wonderful construction company, and every contractor that I've ever worked with has been wonderful. But there are elements out there where in that design build where they're ultimately managing the designer, that there could be some challenges. I mean, you shouldn't have lack of trust issues, but there are realities in the world. So I'm just trying to get around that. Has anybody investigated whether there's a way to partially mitigate that thing, which is the biggest, let's say, disadvantage of design build versus some of the other alternate project delivery methods? Was that clear?
So yeah,
Good luck.
Thank you. So I'll try to answer a little bit. I was involved in two major design build programs recently. One was a $1.6 billion midfield satellite concourse program at LAX. So the key is actually something called a project definition booklet. I think one of our team members talked about it. So, in both those instances, the one at San Diego and LAX, what they did was they had prepared very tight project definition booklet. But once we started, at LAX, we were, like a tier 4 or tier 5 subconsultant working for the contractor through the prime architect. But some of the lessons we learned from LAX we took to San Diego was that the first step that we did was validation of the PDB, project definition booklet. So when we did that, we realized that about 30% of the PDB is not going to work. So we brought that immediately up to the contractor. We told them, hey, we are on an expediter schedule. So the contractor was very willing and listening, and they scheduled a meeting with the owner. We had all hands on the deck meeting. We went through a couple of days of exploring different solutions, and we were telling, hey, this and this are not going to work. At the same time, the challenge being, one other lesson we learned from PDB is that the entire team completely accidentally left out a task which was listed on the PDB. So the owner made us eat the cost and do that work, which cost us some money. But the contract we signed was that whatever mentioned in the PDB, we are going to do that. So there are benefits on both sides, but project definition booklet is definitely a key document that will help the design build process to go smoother.
Thanks, Joe. All right, who else? Come on, we left a lot of time for you guys to ask questions. Hot topic. Tim, you have something to say?
You know, we had, when we were preparing for this, we talked about the retention issue, that sometimes the A&E firm winds up getting stuck with retention along with the contractor. Is there any way to resolve that, or is that an issue?
Yeah, I think that's a great question for the panel. Why don't we have you guys kind of speak to that?
Well, from a contractor standpoint, we have both professional services from a design standpoint, if it's design build, and a professional services cost from pre-con, if it's CMAR or both. And we typically don't sign contracts that withhold retention on our pre-con services. And just being honest, if there are those stipulations in the contract, then our pre-con and our design fee would be a little higher to help to cover those costs up front.
So what they're talking about is a method of, at the end of the project, that the contractor would come back and make corrections, and all of the subs, of course, to come back and make corrections. And that's that 10% retainage. That's what that's for. So it really doesn't apply to the design team. We're a service-oriented group of people, and I think that is a bit tough for us in the design build. Is we don't want that retainage held over, and sometimes for 3 years, while the construction is ongoing. So we hope that gets pulled out of there, and don't forget about it.
Yeah, we're good with the retention on a construction project. I mean, I held it on myself in my house. But, we're good with the retention. We like to see the 5% at 50% or 10% up to 50%, something like that, because some of our subcontractors, the early ones, the dirt work guys, their retention is held until the project's completed. So we try to manage a lot of that, and if you can put that in there, sometimes you can get a better price from the sub. But yeah, we're good with the retention on the construction, but the professional services side is where we kind of balk a little.
Yeah, from the owner's perspective, I think, I checked with our procurement folks, and I think our attorney's in the back of the room, so he may correct me if I'm wrong, but we typically we haven't dealt with that. We just say, yeah, it's part of the contract. We don't really care. You guys work it out amongst yourself how you want to do that. But that being said, it's negotiable. I think those kind of things are negotiable. If you can bring to the airport and say, hey, we're going to carry this extra cost. There's a cost component to you. Then we can probably, we can at least talk about it, I guess is what I'd say.
All right, thank you. Coming at you.
Yeah, just a question on risk assessment when you do these in the beginning. Excuse me. I've been involved in some issues on design build where the risk assessment process wasn't performed between the designer and the contractor, and then really getting those definitions set in. So do you guys, when you do your design build, do you set up with a risk assessment, you do a planning and kind of try to tie in what your original estimate, or do you, as a contractor, do you do it separately? Do you pull in the designer, or how does that work?
So just to be clear on the risk assessment, because we do go, before we even take a job, we do a risk analysis of it. What's the market? What's the labor market? What is the biggest risk of the project? Is it unforeseen underground? Is it the passenger inflow inside and outside of the airport? That's what I'm looking at. And from a dollar standpoint, what is the design looking like? Is that exactly what you're talking about?
One issue is basically third-party agency reviews sometimes, not necessarily just on airports, but coming in, and then they'll have certain standards, and the contractor kind of has to keep on track of what those changes so they can, in a timely manner based on the design build definition books of getting stuff back to the client. So, and then, so there gets, it could actually create a wedge between the designer and the contractor, meaning that the designer's kind of saying, well, I have to follow certain guidelines because that's what's happening, but then not necessarily coming back at the designer saying, well, you over-designed this compared to, what we originally bid.
Well, if it is a requirement, then we should have communicated it as a group. Whether it's a third-party agency requirement, a city permitting requirement, or whatever that requirement would, or FAA requirement, it should have been communicated early on that we have captured all those. And I think a lot of times when we start design build, we'll look at all of the requirements, and we really rely on the consultants to look at that, because we do business in a lot of different municipalities. I mean, I got 2 jobs now. One's in Oro Valley, one's in Tucson, and I've done work in San Diego and San Francisco. So everybody's different, and so we kind of rely on the designer consultant team to help pull those requirements together.
And I would add, from an owner's perspective, it goes back to on design build, that the project definition or the requirements. Hopefully you've done your code analysis. I mean, you're not going to get everything, but the other thing for risk, again, because we don't want the contractors just to have all this, risk built into their contract. I mean, I know FAA doesn't like it, but put your owner allowances and your contractor contingencies and define those. If there's a unknown about timelines for reviews or utility type, build those in as allowances and contingencies, and then you share the risk essentially.
So the 2 mics are model contractors and model owners, I'm going to have to say. But I think that what your question is sort of the crux of the problem, is that sometimes at the very, very beginning of the project, and it's a big project and it's going to go for a long time, you don't know what all the requirements are, and there's also things that change along the way, and staff changes along the way, and their needs change along the way, the operations changes along the way. And so to say that at the very beginning of the project, the GMP or the price is the price, and that nothing is going to change along the 3 years, but at the end of the 4, 5, 6 years that the budget hasn't changed, but things have changed along the way. That's sort of the difficulty there.
One other quick thing is, when you're putting your scope documents together in a design build, go performance-based, not prescriptive. And that will help a tremendous amount. So you're not prescribing what we have to do. You're just saying, I don't care what you do, this is the way it needs to perform. So that kind of help eliminate some of that from your standpoint.
Okay, thank you. Looks like we are right on time. So why don't we give the panel a round of applause. Thank you, panel.
Hey, thanks again to our speakers. As a reminder, we'll be doing a presentation to Sunnyside School District in lieu of giving a speaker gift. So thank you for that. And now we're on break until 10:15.